The golden hour sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of Kansas City's Crown Center district as luxury cars glided past the gleaming storefront of Sterling Heights, one of the city's most prestigious fine dining establishments. The restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows revealed an interior that sparkled crystal chandeliers, where well-dressed patrons savored their evening meal amid an atmosphere of refined elegance. Travis Kelce pulled his black SUV into a parking spot 3 blocks away from the restaurant, deliberately choosing a location where he wouldn't be immediately recognized. After an exhausting day of training camp with the Kansas City Chiefs, followed by a lengthy meeting with his financial advisors about his expanding restaurant investments, he craved nothing more than a quiet dinner without the usual fanfare that accompanied his public appearance. He adjusted his plain gray hoodie and pulled a black baseball cap low over his eyes, checking himself in the rearview mirror. The casual attire was a stark contrast to his usual game day swagger, but tonight he wanted anonymity. Travis had learned that sometimes the best way to observe how his businesses were truly operating was to experience them as an ordinary customer. Sterling Heights had been his latest acquisition, purchased just 6 months earlier through a series of shell companies to maintain secrecy. The previous owner, facing financial difficulties, had been eager to sell to Travis's investment group. What the current staff didn't know was that their mysterious new owner was sitting in the parking lot, preparing to test their service firsthand. As Travis walked toward the restaurant, he noticed the impeccable exterior maintenance, the pristine landscaping, and the soft amber lighting that made the establishment glow invitingly against the evening sky. Classical music drifted from within, mixing with the gentle murmur of satisfied conversation. Everything appeared perfect from the outside. The heavy oak doors opened with a satisfying weight, and Travis stepped into a world of understated luxury. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, while original artwork adorned cream-colored walls. The scent of truffle oil and fresh herbs filled the air, accompanied by the soft clink of fine china and crystal stemware. Several diners glanced up as he entered, but the dim lighting and his casual appearance allowed him to blend into the background. Travis had become an expert at reading social situations, and tonight he sensed the careful choreography of high-end hospitality in motion. Behind the mahogany host station stood Serafina Blackwood, a striking woman in her late 20s whose perfectly arranged auburn hair and flawless makeup projected an image of sophisticated professionalism. She had worked at Sterling Heights for 3 years, taking pride in her position at what she considered the pinnacle of Kansas City's dining scene. Serafina's eyes swept over Travis as he approached, taking in his worn sneakers, faded jeans, and casual hoodie. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a practiced smile masking a growing sense of disapproval. In her mind, Sterling Heights attracted a certain caliber of clientele, people who understood that dining here was about more than just food. It was about image, status, and respect for tradition. "Good evening," Travis said with his characteristic warm smile, his deep voice carrying its usual friendly tone. "I was hoping to get a table for one, if anything's available." Serafina's pause was brief, but noticeable. She glanced again at his attire, then at the reservation book before her, as if weighing her options. The restaurant was busy but not completely booked, and several tables remained available in various sections. "Sir," she began, her voice carrying a professional courtesy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sterling Heights, a fine dining establishment. Are you certain you're looking for us? There are several more casual options just down the street that might be more suited to..." She gestured vaguely at his outfit. Travis felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times when people made assumptions based on his appearance. Despite his success on the football field and his growing business empire, these moments still stung. But years of media training and personal growth had taught him to respond with grace rather than anger. "Yes, I'm sure this is where I want to dine," he replied calmly, maintaining eye contact with Serafina. "I've heard wonderful things about Sterling Heights." Around them, other patrons began to take notice of the exchange. An elderly couple at a nearby table, Harold and Margaret Whitman, longtime Kansas City resident and regular Sterling Heights customers, observed the interaction with growing concern. Margaret leaned toward her husband, whispered, "That young man seems perfectly pleasant. Why is she treating him that way?" At another table, a young professional named Brooklyn Monroe paused her conversation with her business partner. She recognized something unsettling in Serafina's tone and body language, a subtle but unmistakable condescension that made her uncomfortable. Serafina's smile became more strained as she realized Travis wasn't going to be easily discouraged. She had developed what she considered a sixth sense for determining who belonged at Sterling Heights and who didn't, and everything about this man suggested he was out of his element. "Very well," she said with obvious reluctance. "Let me see what I can arrange. Please wait here a moment." She turned to consult with Marcus Thompson, a veteran server who had worked in Kansas City's restaurant scene for over a decade. Marcus watched the interaction with growing unease, recognizing the signs of what he privately called Serafina's gatekeeping behavior. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked quietly. "Just someone who wandered in off the street," Serafina replied dismissively. "I'll find him something in the back section. Hopefully he'll order quickly and leave." Marcus glanced at Travis, who stood patiently near the entrance, seemingly unbothered by the delay. There was something about the man's calm confidence that struck Marcus as incongruous with Serafina's assessment. In his experience, truly problematic customers were usually aggressive or demanding, not quietly patient like this one. As Serafina returned to Travis, the tension in the restaurant's elegant foyer became palpable. Other staff members had begun to notice the prolonged interaction, and several regular customers were clearly following the unfolding drama. "I can offer you a table," Serafina announced, her tone suggesting she was doing Travis an enormous favor, "but it will be in our more casual section." Travis nodded graciously, though inwardly he was making mental notes about his employees' behavior. This was exactly the kind of intelligence gathering that made his anonymous visits so valuable. "That sounds perfect, thank you." As Serafina led him deeper into the restaurant, past tables filled with Kansas City's social elite, Travis prepared himself for what he suspected would be an enlightening evening. He had no idea that the next few hours would become a defining moment, not just for Sterling Heights, but for everyone present that night. Serafina led Travis through the main dining room with deliberate slowness, ensuring that her route showcased the restaurant's most prestigious table. They passed a corner booth where a prominent Kansas City developer was entertaining clients, then wound around a table where the city's former mayor was celebrating his anniversary. Each table they passed reinforced Serafina's internal narrative about who belonged at Sterling Heights and who didn't. "This way," she said over her shoulder, her voice carrying just loudly enough for nearby diners to hear a subtle note of resignation, as if she were reluctantly accommodating an inconvenience. The journey through the restaurant took them past the wine cellar's glass display, where bottles worth thousands of dollars gleamed under accent lighting, then around the open kitchen, where white-coated chefs orchestrated their culinary ballet. Travis appreciated the restaurant's design and operational flow, mentally cataloging both strengths and areas for improvement. Their destination proved to be a small table in the far corner of the restaurant, positioned next to the kitchen's service entrance, where the constant traffic of servers and busboys created a less than ideal dining atmosphere. The lighting was noticeably dimmer here, and the ambient noise from kitchen operations occasionally punctuated conversation. Serafina stopped beside the table with a flourish that seemed almost theatrical. "Here we are," she announced, pulling out the chair with unnecessary force. "This should be perfect for your need." Travis surveyed the location without complaint, noting how it was clearly designed to encourage quick turnover rather than leisurely dining. The table was smaller than others in the restaurant, positioned to catch every sound from the kitchen, and far removed from the ambiance that made Sterling Heights special. "Thank you," he said simply, settling into his seat with the same easy grace he displayed on the football field. His calm acceptance of the situation seemed to irritate Serafina, who had clearly expected some form of protest or discomfort. She placed a leather-bound menu on the table with more force than necessary, the sound echoing through the nearby area and drawing glances from surrounding tables. "Our sommelier won't be available for this section," she announced, "but I can explain any questions you might have about our simpler options." The condescension in her voice was now unmistakable, and several nearby diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brooklyn Monroe, who had followed the pair's progress through the restaurant, felt her earlier discomfort crystallize into outright disapproval of Serafina's behavior. Travis opened the menu with genuine interest, scanning the carefully crafted descriptions and noting the sophisticated flavor combination. Despite the circumstances, He found himself impressed with the culinary creativity displayed on the pages. His investment in Sterling Heights was beginning to feel more validated, even if the front-of-house management clearly needed attention. "Everything looks excellent," he said, looking up at Serafina with a warm smile. "Could you recommend something special? I'm interested in experiencing what makes Sterling Heights unique." Serafina's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She had expected him to be overwhelmed by the menu's complexity and price point, perhaps asking for simpler fare or expressing sticker shock. His confident engagement with the restaurant's upscale offerings didn't fit her preconceived narrative. "Well," she began, her tone taking on the exaggerated patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child, "our most popular dishes tend to be quite sophisticated. The braised short ribs require a developed palate, and our signature seafood tower is really designed for customers who regularly dine at establishments of this caliber." Her words carried clearly the surrounding table, where the Whitmans exchanged troubled glances. Harold leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That's completely inappropriate. The young man hasn't done anything wrong." Marcus Thompson, observing from across the dining room, felt his professional instincts activate. In all his years in hospitality, he had learned that treating any customer poorly reflected badly on the entire establishment. Serafina's behavior was not just unprofessional, it was potentially damaging to Sterling Heights' reputation. Travis maintained his composure, though inwardly he was documenting every aspect of this interaction for future reference. "I appreciate the guidance," he said evenly. "What would you personally recommend as Sterling Heights' signature dish?" The question seemed to catch Serafina off guard. She had expected him to retreat to safer, less expensive options, not engage more deeply with the restaurant's premium offering. Her pause stretched long enough to become noticeable to nearby table. "The Wagyu beef tenderloin is our most exclusive offering," she finally replied, her voice carrying a challenging edge. "It's prepared with truffle reduction and costs $200. Most people find it quite ambitious." The emphasis on ambitious was clearly meant to discourage, but Travis simply nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds perfect. I'll have the Wagyu tenderloin." Serafina's mask of professional courtesy slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine surprise. She had been certain that the price point would send him retreating to more modest selection, or better yet, prompt him to leave entirely. "Are you certain?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "It's quite expensive, and there's really no need to—" "I'm certain," Travis interrupted gently but firmly. "And perhaps a wine pairing? I'd appreciate your recommendation." The request for wine pairing was the final straw for Serafina's already strained professionalism. In her mind, this was clear evidence of someone trying to appear more sophisticated than they actually were, probably planning to examine the bill closely and possibly even dispute charges later. "Our wine pairings start at $50 per glass," she said, her voice now carrying open skepticism. "Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed with such an expensive dinner?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and its implications weren't lost on the other diners within earshot. Brooklyn Monroe felt her cheeks flush with second-hand embarrassment at Serafina's behavior. At their corner table, the Whitmans looked openly disapproving. "Yes, I'm sure," Travis replied, his voice remaining steady despite the growing attention their conversation was attracting. "I'm here to enjoy the full Sterling Heights experience." Serafina's smile became increasingly forced as she realized her subtle tactics weren't achieving the desired result. "Very well, I'll place your order, though I should mention that our kitchen is quite busy tonight. Service might be slower than usual for this section." The implication was clear. Travis should expect substandard service to match his perceived status. But Travis simply nodded graciously, as if she had offered him a perfectly reasonable explanation rather than a thinly veiled threat. As Serafina walked away from the table, her frustration was evident in her stride and the set of her shoulder. She had expected this situation to resolve itself quickly and quietly, but instead found herself committed to serving an expensive meal to someone she was convinced couldn't appreciate or properly afford it. Marcus Thompson intercoursed the encounter with growing concern. He had worked with Serafina for years and generally found her to be competent, but tonight he was seeing a side of her that troubled him deeply. The customer she was treating so dismissively had done nothing wrong. In fact, He was being remarkably patient and courteous in the face of obviously poor service. As Travis settled back in his chair to wait for his meal, he reflected on the irony of the situation. Here he was, being treated as an unwelcome intruder in his own restaurant, experiencing firsthand the kind of behavior that could destroy a business's reputation. The evening was becoming more educational than he had anticipated, though not in the way he had originally planned. 20 minutes passed before Serafina returned to Travis's table, carrying a silver tray with his Wagyu tenderloin. The delay had been intentional. She had instructed the kitchen to prioritize other orders, hoping that the extended wait might encourage her unwanted customer to reconsider his choices or simply leave. During this time, Travis had become an object of curious attention throughout the restaurant. Other diners occasionally glanced his way, some with sympathy, others with confusion about why such an obviously problematic situation was being allowed to continue. The Whitmans had grown increasingly agitated, with Margaret whispering urgently to her husband about the need to speak with management. Serafina approached Travis's table with exaggerated ceremony, as if she were performing a great service, rather than simply delivering a meal he had ordered and would pay for. She set the plate down with unnecessary precision, the porcelain making a sharp clink against the table surface. "Your Wagyu tenderloin," she announced, her voice carrying across the nearby area. "I do hope you can appreciate the preparation. It's quite sophisticated." The dish was indeed beautiful. Perfectly seared beef, surrounded by artfully arranged vegetables and drizzled with the promised truffle reduction. Travis examined it with genuine appreciation, noting the culinary skill evident in every element of the presentation. "It looks outstanding," he said sincerely. "Please give my compliments to the chef." Serafina's expression remained skeptical, as if she doubted his ability to properly evaluate what he was seeing. "Chef Rodriguez is quite particular about his standard," she replied. "He typically reserves this preparation for customers who frequent establishments of this caliber." The implication was unmistakable. Travis was receiving special treatment that he hadn't earned and probably couldn't appreciate. Several nearby diners shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the inappropriate nature of Serafina's commentary. Brooklyn Monroe had heard enough. Rising from her table, she approached Marcus Thompson, who was observing the situation from near the bar. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "but I think you should know that your hostess is treating that gentleman quite poorly. It's becoming uncomfortable for other customers." Marcus nodded grimly. He had been watching the situation unfold with growing concern and was already considering intervention. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," he replied. "I'll address it immediately." Meanwhile, Travis tasted his meal and found it exceptional. The beef was perfectly prepared, the flavors complex and well-balanced. Despite the circumstances surrounding its delivery, he found himself genuinely impressed with Sterling Heights' culinary capability. "This is really excellent," he told Serafina when she returned to check on him, hoping to reset their interaction on a more positive. Instead of acknowledging the compliment, Serafina's smile became even more strained. "I'm glad you think so," she replied, her tone suggesting she found his appreciation surprising. "It's probably quite different from what you're used to." The comment was the final straw for Harold Whitman, who had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the evening. He stood from his table and approached Travis directly, ignoring Serafina's startled expression. "Sir," Harold said, extending his hand to Travis, "I'm Harold Whitman, and I wanted to apologize for the treatment you've received tonight. This isn't representative of Kansas City hospitality." Travis stood and shook Harold's hand warmly. "Travis," he replied simply, "and please, don't worry. These things happen." "No, they shouldn't," Harold insisted, his voice carrying enough authority to draw attention from surrounding tables. "Margaret and I have been dining here for years, and we've never seen behavior like this. It's absolutely unacceptable." Serafina watched this exchange with growing alarm. Harold Whitman was one of Sterling Heights' most valued customers, a man whose opinion carried significant weight in Kansas City's social circle. His public criticism of her behavior was potentially catastrophic for her position. "Mr. Whitman," she began, attempting to smooth over the situation, "I assure you that we provide excellent service to all our customers." "That's clearly not the case," Harold interrupted, his typically gentle demeanor replaced by firm disapproval. "I've watched you treat this young man with nothing but condescension since he arrived. It's embarrassing." Margaret Whitman joined her husband, adding her voice to his criticism. "We've brought many friends to Sterling Heights over the years," she said, But if this is how the restaurant treats its customers, we'll need to reconsider our recommendation. The public nature of the Whitmans' criticism sent ripples throughout the dining room. Other customers began paying closer attention to the unfolding drama, and several started whispering among themselves about what they had witnessed. Marcus Thompson finally decided he had seen enough. He approached the group gathered around Travis's table, his professional instincts in full operation mode. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said diplomatically, "please allow me to address this situation." He turned to Travis with genuine warmth. "Sir, I apologize profusely for any service issues you may have experienced tonight. This is absolutely not our standard, and I want to make this right." Serafina felt panic rising in her chest as she realized how badly the situation had deteriorated. What had begun as what she considered appropriate gatekeeping had spiraled into a public relations disaster involving some of the restaurant's most important customers. "Marcus," she said urgently, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Brooklyn Monroe interjected, having returned to observe Marcus's intervention, "is how anyone could think this behavior is appropriate. I've been in hospitality myself, and this is completely unprofessional." Travis found himself in the surreal position of being defended by complete strangers, while being criticized as unwelcome by the employee of his own restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he remained focused on gathering information about how Sterling Heights operated under normal circumstances. "I appreciate everyone's concern," Travis said calmly, "but really, it's not necessary. I'm just here to enjoy dinner." His gracious response to the situation only made Serafina's behavior appear more unreasonable by contrast. Harold Whitman shook his head in admiration. "Young man, you're handling this with remarkable grace, but that doesn't excuse what's happened here." As the group continued to discuss the situation, Serafina felt the walls closing in around her. Never intended for things to escalate to this level. In her mind, she had simply been maintaining Sterling Heights' standard, but now she found herself at the center of a growing controversy involving multiple customers. Marcus Thompson made a decision that would prove pivotal to the evening's resolution. "Sir," he said to Travis, "would you allow me to move you to a proper table and ensure you receive the service you deserve?" Travis considered the offer carefully. Part of him wanted to maintain his anonymous observation, but another part recognized that the situation had moved beyond simple intelligence gathering. "That's very kind," he replied, "but I'm actually quite comfortable where I am." His refusal to be relocated, even after everything that had happened, only reinforced his reputation for grace under pressure among the other diners. It also meant that whatever was going to happen next would unfold right here, in front of everyone who had witnessed Serafina's behavior. As the various parties returned to their table, the atmosphere in Sterling Heights had fundamentally changed. What had begun as an elegant evening of fine dining had transformed into something much more significant, a test of character, integrity, and the true meaning of hospitality. And the most dramatic revelations were still to come. As the evening progressed, the tension that had built around Travis's table began to spread throughout Sterling Heights like ripples in a pond. Other diners continued to cast glances toward the corner where he sat, many having overheard enough of the earlier confrontation to understand that something unprecedented was unfolding. Serafina attempted to return to her normal duty, but her composure was clearly shaken. She moved through the restaurant with less confidence than usual, acutely aware that her behavior had drawn unwanted attention from customers whose opinions could affect her career. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As the senior server on duty, he felt responsible for the evening's service quality, but he also recognized that addressing Serafina's behavior more forcefully might create an even larger scene. Travis finished his meal methodically, savoring each bite while observing the restaurant's operations with the trained eye of both an athlete and a businessman. The kitchen staff was clearly talented, the food exceptional, and the dining room's ambiance carefully crafted. What concerned him was the gap between Sterling Heights' potential and its current front-of-house management. When Serafina finally approached with the check, she carried herself with forced bravado, as if she could somehow reclaim control of the situation through sheer determination. The leather folder containing the bill seemed to represent her final opportunity to validate her assumptions about Travis's financial capacity. "Your check, sir," she said, placing the folder on the table with deliberate emphasis. The total includes the Wagyu tenderloin, wine pairing, tax, and suggested gratuity. It comes to $437. She announced the total loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, clearly expecting some form of sticker shock or financial distress. Instead, Travis simply opened the folder and examined the itemized bill with the same calm attention he had given the menu earlier. "Everything looks correct," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket for his wallet. Serafina watched with barely concealed anticipation as he extracted what appeared to be a simple black credit card. She had convinced herself that this moment would expose the truth about his financial situation, that he would fumble with multiple cards, ask to modify the order, or reveal some other sign that the expense was beyond his means. Instead, Travis handed her the card with the same casual confidence he had displayed throughout the evening. "Thank you for your service tonight," he said with genuine courtesy. Serafina took the card and glanced at it briefly before heading to the payment terminal. It was only when she was processing the transaction that she noticed something unusual about the card's weight and texture. Looking more closely, she realized it was a black American Express Centurion card, one of the most exclusive credit cards in the world, available only to individuals with exceptional wealth and financial standing. Her hands began to tremble slightly as the full implications hit her. Only someone with extraordinary means would qualify for such a card, which meant her assumptions about Travis had been completely wrong. Worse, she had spent the entire evening publicly demeaning someone who was clearly far more successful than she had imagined. The transaction processed without any issue, as she had somehow known it would. When the receipt printed, she stared at it in growing horror, realizing that the tip amount alone exceeded what many people spent on an entire dinner. Marcus Thompson noticed Serafina's suddenly pale complexion when she returned from processing the payment. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. I think I may have made a mistake," she whispered, showing him the credit card. "Look at this." Marcus examined the card and immediately understood the situation's gravity. He had seen Centurion cards before during his years in high-end hospitality, and he knew they were reserved for individuals with extraordinary wealth. The realization that they had just provided substandard service to someone of such obvious means was professionally mortifying. "We need to make this right," Marcus said urgently. "Who is he?" Before Serafina could respond, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man in an expensive suit who had just entered the restaurant. Richard Sterling, Sterling Heights general manager, had received a text message from one of his regular customers about an unusual situation unfolding at the restaurant. "Marcus," Richard said quietly, "I received a call about some service issues tonight. Can you brief me on the situation?" Marcus quickly explained the evening's event, describing Serafina's treatment of Travis and the growing customer complaint. As he spoke, Richard's expression grew increasingly serious. "Where is this customer now?" Richard asked. "Still at table 12, Marcus replied. "He just finished paying his check." Richard immediately walked toward Travis's table, with Marcus and a reluctant Serafina following behind. As they approached, Travis was putting away his wallet and preparing to leave. "Sir," Richard said, extending his hand, "I'm Richard Sterling, the general manager. I understand there may have been some service issues tonight, and I wanted to personally apologize." Travis stood and shook Richard's hand with a warm smile. "Travis Kelce," he replied, "and really, there's no need for apology. These things happen in the restaurant business." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. Travis Kelce, not just a Kansas City Chiefs superstar, but also a prominent local businessman with investments throughout the city. Richard felt his stomach drop as he realized the full magnitude of the evening's disaster. "Mr. Kelce," Richard said, his voice barely controlled, "I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for your experience tonight. This is absolutely not representative of our standard." Around them, other diners who had overheard the introduction began to murmur among themselves. Several people pulled out their phones, and Travis could see the beginning of what would likely become social media coverage of the evening's events. Harold Whitman approached the group with his wife. "Travis Kelce?" he said with surprise. "The Chiefs' tight end? Young man, why didn't you say something earlier?" Travis's smile remained genuine despite the awkwardness of the situation. "I was hoping to just have a quiet dinner," he replied. "I didn't want to make a big deal about it." "But you're a local hero," Margaret Whitman added, "and you've been treated terribly tonight." Richard Sterling felt his career flashing before his eyes as he processed the full scope of the disaster. Not only had they provided poor service to a celebrity, but that celebrity was also a prominent figure in Kansas City's business community. The potential damage to Sterling Heights' reputation was incalculable. Serafina stood frozen beside them, finally understanding the true magnitude of her mistake. She had spent the evening condescending to one of Kansas City's most recognizable figures, someone whose opinion could influence countless potential customers. "Mr. Kelce," Richard continued desperately, "please allow us to comp your meal and arrange for you to return as our guest. We want to show you the service experience that Sterling Heights is truly capable of providing." Travis considered the offer thoughtful. Part of him appreciated Richard's genuine concern and desire to make amends, but another part of him, the part that had been building toward this moment all evening, knew that this situation required a different kind of resolution. "That's very generous," Travis replied, "but I think there might be a better way to handle this situation." He paused, looking around at the assembled group: Richard, Marcus, Serafina, and the various customers who had become invested in the evening's drama. The moment had arrived for the final revelation that would transform not just this evening, but potentially the entire culture of Sterling Heights. "Actually," Travis said with a slight smile, "I think we need to talk about more than just tonight's service. You see, I'm not just a customer here at Sterling Heights. I'm also the owner." The revelation hung in the air like a suspended note, creating a moment of absolute silence in the corner of Sterling Heights, where the evening's drama had unfolded. Richard Sterling felt the blood drain from his face as the full implication of Travis's words sank in. Serafina stepped backward as if physically struck, her hand moving to her throat in an unconscious gesture of shock. "The owner?" Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Travis nodded calmly, maintaining the same composed demeanor he had displayed throughout the evening. "I purchased Sterling Heights 6 months ago through KCE Hospitality Group. I've been waiting for the right opportunity to visit unannounced and see how the restaurant operates when management doesn't know I'm here." Jan Marcus Thompson closed his eyes briefly, understanding immediately why Travis had seemed so unruffled by Serafina's treatment. Harold and Margaret Whitman exchanged glances of amazement, while Brooklyn Monroe covered her mouth to suppress a gasp of surprise. Serafina felt the world spinning around her as every interaction from the evening replayed in her mind with devastating new content. She had spent hours systematically insulting, undermining, and attempting to humiliate her own employer. The magnitude of her professional disaster was beyond anything she could have imagined. "Mr. Kelce," Richard began, his voice shaking, "I had no idea. The purchase was handled through intermediaries. I never knew that was intentional." Travis replied gently, "I wanted to understand how Sterling Heights really operates, and tonight has been extremely educational." He looked around at the assembled group, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "I've learned that we have exceptional culinary talent, beautiful facility, and some truly professional staff members." His gaze moved to Marcus Thompson. "I've also learned that we have some significant issues to address." Serafina finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Kelce, I don't know what to say. I never meant. I was just trying to maintain standards." "Whose standard?" Travis asked, his tone remaining calm but pointed. "Because the standards I expect from any business I own are quite different from what I experienced tonight." Richard Sterling's mind raced as he tried to process the evening's implications for his own career. As general manager, he was ultimately responsible for the culture and service quality at Sterling Heights. The fact that such behavior had occurred under his leadership, regardless of whether he was present, reflected poorly on his manager. "Sir," Richard said, attempting to regain some professional composure, "I take full responsibility for tonight's service failure. If you'll allow me, I'd like to implement immediate changes to ensure this never happens again." Travis appreciated Richard's willingness to accept accountability, recognizing it as a positive leadership quality, even in crisis. "I'm interested in hearing your thought," he replied. "But first, I think we need to address the immediate situation." He turned to face the other diners who had become involved in the evening's events. Harold and Margaret Whitman, Brooklyn Monroe, and several other customers were watching with fascination as the drama reached its climax. "Ladies and gentlemen," Travis said, addressing the group with the same natural charisma that made him effective in media interviews. I want to thank you for your kindness tonight. The fact that complete strangers were willing to speak up for fair treatment says something wonderful about Kansas City's character. Harold Whitman stepped forward, still processing the revelation. Travis, what you've experienced tonight is inexcusable, regardless of who you are. Every customer deserves respect. That's exactly right, Travis agreed. And that's the standard I want Sterling Heights to embody going forward. He looked back at Serafina, who remained frozen in place, clearly terrified about her employment status. Travis had already decided how to handle her situation, but he wanted to use this moment as a teaching opportunity for everyone present. "Serafina," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "your behavior tonight was completely unacceptable. You made assumptions about me based on my appearance, then spent the evening trying to make me feel unwelcome in a restaurant I own." She nodded miserably, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I know. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. But I want you to understand something important," Travis continued. "Even if I had been exactly who you thought I was, someone with limited means trying to have a nice dinner, your behavior would have been just as wrong. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The lesson wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus Thompson nodded emphatically, while Richard Sterling made mental notes about the cultural changes he would need to implement. Travis turned to Richard. "I want you to arrange for every staff member to receive training on hospitality principles and unconscious bias, not because of what happened to me specifically, but because I want Sterling Heights to be a place where everyone feels welcome." "Absolutely," Richard replied immediately. "I'll have a comprehensive program in place within the week." "Good. And Marcus," Travis addressed the veteran server directly, "I was impressed with how you handled yourself tonight. You recognized a problem and tried to address it professionally. That's the kind of leadership I want to see throughout the organization." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and validation. "Thank you, sir. I believe strongly that hospitality is about making every guest feel valued." Travis nodded approvingly before returning his attention to Serafina. Her face was pale, and she was clearly expecting to be terminated immediately. "Serafina," Travis said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "what happened tonight was a significant failure of judgment and professionalism. In most circumstances, this would be grounds for immediate termination." She closed her eyes, accepting what seemed inevitable. "However," Travis continued, "I believe in second chances when someone shows genuine understanding of their mistake. You're going to undergo extensive retraining, including sensitivity and hospitality course. You'll also be working closely with Marcus to understand what real customer service looks like. Here's the revised ending, maintaining the core message, but more concise." Serafina's eyes opened in surprise, tears of relief replacing her earlier shame. You're not firing me? I'm giving you one opportunity to become better," Travis replied firmly. "But understand, there won't be a second chance. Sterling Heights will treat every guest with respect, regardless of appearance or assumption." Richard Sterling stepped forward eagerly. "Mr. Kelce, I'll personally oversee her retraining. Tonight showed me we need cultural change, not just individual correction." "Exactly," Travis nodded. "I want monthly reports on customer feedback, staff progress." Harold Whitman approached with admiration. "Travis, your leadership tonight was remarkable. You chose education over punishment, because the goal is preventing this from happening again," Travis explained. "I want Sterling Heights known for making everyone feel valued." Brooklyn Monroe added, "As someone in customer service, I'm impressed. Most businesses just do damage control." "I hope you'll give us another chance," Travis smiled. "Definitely. And I'll tell everyone about both the problem and the solution I witnessed tonight." Marcus Thompson asked quietly, "Sir, why give Serafina another chance when most owners would fire her immediately?" Travis considered thoughtfully. "Because people can change when they understand why they must. If she applies tonight's lesson, she could become our best employee. If not, we'll have our answer." As Travis prepared to leave, Serafina approached one final time. "Mr. Kelce, I learned something important tonight. Not just about service, but about who I want to be. Thank you for this chance." Travis shook her hand. "Actions speak louder than words, Serafina. Show me this was learning, not just embarrassment." "I will," she promised. "Absolutely," Harold called after him as he left. "Travis, thank you for showing us real leadership. Kansas City is lucky to have you. Kansas City gave me everything, Travis replied. It's my privilege to give back. 6 months later, Sterling Heights became known throughout Kansas City, not just for exceptional cuisine, but for inclusive hospitality. Serafina had transformed into one of their most valued employees, proving Travis's faith in human growth wasn't misplaced. And Travis continued making unannounced visits, always pleased that the lessons from that memorable evening had become Sterling Heights' foundation, a testament to second chances and treating everyone with dignity.